The economy of Russia has gradually transformed from a planned economy into a mixed market-oriented economy. It has enormous natural resources, particularly oil and natural gas. In 2023, it was the world's 11th largest economy by nominal GDP, 6th largest by purchasing power parity, PPP, according to IMF, and 5th largest according to World Bank. Due to a volatile currency exchange rate, Russia's GDP, as measured in dollars, fluctuates sharply. Russia was the last major economy to join the WTO, becoming a member in 2012. Russia's vast geography is an important determinant of its economic activity, with the country holding a large share of the world's natural resources. It has been widely described as an energy superpower, as it has the world's largest natural gas reserves, second largest coal reserves, 8th largest oil reserves, and the largest oil shale reserves in Europe. It is the world's leading natural gas exporter, the second largest natural gas producer, the second largest oil exporter and producer, and third largest coal exporter. Russia's foreign exchange reserves are the world's 4th largest. It has a labor force of roughly 70 million people, which is the world's 7th largest. Russia is the world's 3rd largest exporter of arms. The oil and gas sector accounted up to roughly 34% of Russia's federal budget revenues and up to 54% of its exports in 2021. Russia has the world's 5th largest number of billionaires. Russia's inequality of household income and wealth remains comparatively high, with a Gini coefficient of 36 in 2020 as compared to 39.8 in the US in 2021. Following the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, the country has faced extensive sanctions and boycotts from the Western world and its allies, which are aimed at isolating the Russian economy from the Western financial system. Russia's economy has been affected by the sanctions but appears relatively resilient to them. The Russian economy is volatile. Since 1989, its institutional environment was transformed from a socialist command economy to a capitalistic market system. Its industrial structure dramatically shifted away from heavy investment in manufacturing and agriculture toward market services, oil, gas, and mining. Richard Connolly argues that for the last 4 centuries, there are 4 main characteristics of the Russian economy that have shaped the system and persisted despite the political upheavals. First of all, the weakness of the legal system means that impartial courts do not rule and contracts are problematic. Second is the underdevelopment of modern economic activities, with very basic peasant agriculture dominant into the 1930s. Third is technological underdevelopment, eased somewhat by borrowing from the West in the 1920s. And fourth, lower living standards compared to Western Europe and North America. The economy of the Russian Empire covers the economic history of Russia from 1721 to the October Revolution of 1917, which ushered in a period of civil war, culminating in the creation of the Soviet Union. Russian national income per capita increased and moved to closer to the most developed economies of Northern and Western Europe from the late 17th century to the 1740s. After the 1740s, the Russian economy stagnated and declined. In the 18th century, Russian national income per capita was about 40 to 70% of British per capita income, but higher than Poland's. By 1860, Russian GDP per capita was similar to that of Japan, 1/3 of GDP per capita in the United States or the United Kingdom, and twice that of China or India. Russia was a late industrializer. Serfdom, which held back development of the wage labor market and created a shortage of labor for industry, was abolished in 1861. In the aftermath, GDP per capita was volatile and did not substantially increase. Steady economic growth began in the 1890s, alongside a structural transformation of the Russian economy. By the time World War I started, more than half the Russian economy was still devoted to agriculture. By the early 20th century, the Russian economy had fallen further behind the American and British economies. From the late 19th century to the early 20th century, the economy grew at a similar pace as the Japanese economy and faster than the Brazilian, Indian, and Chinese economies. Beginning in 1928, the course of the Soviet Union's economy was guided by a series of 5-year plans. By the 1950s, the Soviet Union had rapidly evolved from a mainly agrarian society into a major industrial power. By the 1970s, the Soviet Union, was in an era of stagnation. The complex demands of the modern economy and inflexible administration overwhelmed and constrained the central planners. The volume of decisions facing planners in Moscow became overwhelming. The cumbersome procedures for bureaucratic administration foreclosed the free communication and flexible response required at the enterprise level for dealing with worker alienation, innovation, customers, and suppliers. From 1975 to 1985, corruption and data manipulation became common practice within the bureaucracy to report satisfied targets and quotas, thus entrenching the crisis. Starting in 1986, Mikhail Gorbachev attempted to address economic problems by moving towards a market-oriented socialist economy. Gorbachev's policies of perestroika failed to rejuvenate the Soviet economy. Instead, a process of political and economic disintegration culminated in the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia underwent a radical transformation, moving from a centrally planned economy to a globally integrated market economy. Corrupt and haphazard privatization processes turned over major state-owned firms to politically connected oligarchs, which has left equity ownership highly concentrated. Yeltsin's program of radical, market-oriented reform came to be known as a shock therapy. It was based on the policies associated with the Washington Consensus, recommendations of the IMF, and a group of top American economists, including Larry Summers, who in 1994 urged for the three actions, privatization, stabilization, and liberalization, to be completed as soon as possible. With deep corruption afflicting the process, the result was disastrous, with real GDP falling by more than 40% by 1999, hyperinflation which wiped out personal savings, crime and destitution spreading rapidly. The jump in prices from shock therapy wiped out the modest savings accumulated by Russians under socialism and resulted in a regressive redistribution of wealth in favor of elites who owned non-monetary assets. Shock therapy was accompanied by a drop in the standard of living, including surging economic inequality and poverty, along with increased excess mortality and a decline in life expectancy. Russia suffered the largest peacetime rise in mortality ever experienced by an industrialized country. Likewise, the consumption of meat decreased. In 1990, an average citizen consumed 63 kilograms of meat a year. By 1999, it had decreased to 45 kilograms. Russia bounced back quickly from the August 1998 financial crash, partly because of a devaluation of the ruble, which made domestic producers more competitive nationally and internationally. Between 2000 and 2002, significant pro-growth economic reforms included a comprehensive tax reform, which introduced a flat income tax of 13%, and a broad effort at deregulation which benefited small and medium-sized enterprises. Between 2000 and 2008, Russian economy got a major boost from rising commodity prices. GDP grew on average 7% per year. Disposable incomes more than doubled and in dollar-denominated terms increased eightfold. The volume of consumer credit between 2000 and 2006 increased 45 times, fueling a boom in private consumption. The number of people living below poverty line declined from 30% in 2000 to 14% in 2008. Russia repaid its borrowing of $3.3 billion from the IMF 3 years early in 2005. Inflation remained a problem, however, as the central bank aggressively expanded money supply to combat appreciation of the ruble. Nevertheless, in 2007 the World Bank declared that the Russian economy achieved unprecedented macroeconomic stability. Until October 2007, Russia maintained impressive fiscal discipline with budget surpluses every year from 2000. Russian banks were hit by the global credit crunch in 2008, though no long-term damage was done thanks to proactive and timely response by the government and central bank, which shielded the banking system from effects of the global financial crisis. A sharp but brief recession in Russia was followed by a strong recovery beginning in late 2009. Russia's energy exports fueled a rapid growth in living standards, with real disposable income rising by 160%. In dollar-denominated terms, this amounted to a more than seven-fold increase in disposable incomes since 2000. In the same period, unemployment and poverty more than halved and Russians' self-assessed life satisfaction also rose significantly. This growth was a combined result of the 2000s commodities boom, high oil prices, as well as prudent economic and fiscal policies. However, these gains have been distributed unevenly, as the 110 wealthiest individuals were found in a report by Credit Suisse to own 35% of all financial assets held by Russian households. Russia also has the second largest volume of illicit money outflows, having lost over $880 billion between 2002 and 2011 in this way. Since 2008, Forbes has repeatedly named Moscow the billionaire capital of the world. Russia joined the World Trade Organization, WTO, on August 22, 2012 after 19 years of negotiations. Rapid GDP and income growth continued until 2013. The most important topic of discussion in the economy for a decade was the middle-income trap. In 2013, the World Bank announced that Russia had graduated to a high-income economy based on the results of 2012, but in 2016 it was reclassified as an upper-middle-income economy due to changes in the exchange rate of the Russian ruble, which is a floating currency. While the UN Human Development Index, which assesses progress in the standard of living, health, and education, ranks Russia among the very high human development countries. Russian leaders repeatedly spoke of the need to diversify the economy away from its dependence on oil and gas and foster a high-technology sector. In 2012, oil, gas, and petroleum products accounted for over 70% of total exports. This economic model appeared to show its limits when, after years of strong performance, the Russian economy expanded by a mere 1.3% in 2013. Several reasons were proposed to explain the slowdown, including a prolonged recession in the EU, which is Russia's largest trading partner, stagnant oil prices, lack of spare industrial capacity, and demographic problems. Political turmoil in neighboring Ukraine added to the uncertainty and suppressed investment. Following the annexation of Crimea in March 2014 and Russia's involvement in the ongoing war in Donbass, the United States, the European Union, Canada, and Japan imposed sanctions on Russia. This led to the decline of the Russian ruble and sparked fears of a Russian financial crisis. Russia responded with sanctions against a number of countries, including a one-year period of total ban on food imports from the European Union and the United States. The Russian economy risked going into recession from early 2014, mainly due to falling oil prices, sanctions, and the subsequent capital flight. While in 2014 GDP growth remained positive at 0.6%, in 2015 the Russian economy shrunk by 3.7% and was expected to shrink further in 2016. By 2016, the Russian economy rebounded with 0.3% GDP growth and officially exited recession. The growth continued in 2017 with an increase of 1.5%. In 2019, the Ministry of Natural Resources estimated the country's mineral reserves in physical terms. At the end of 2017, oil reserves were 9.04 billion tons, gas reserves were 14.47 trillion cubic meters, gold reserves were 1,407 tons, and diamonds reserves were 375 million metric carats. Then for the first time, the ministry evaluated the mineral reserves of Russia in terms of value. The combined value of all mineral and energy resources, oil, gas, gold, copper, iron ore, thermal and lignite coal, and diamonds, amounted to 55.24 trillion rubles, or $844 billion, or 60% of GDP for 2017. The assessment occurred after the adoption of a new classification of reserves in Russia, and the object of the methodology was only those fields for which a license was issued. So the assessment of the Ministry of Natural Resources is less than the total volume of explored reserves. Experts criticize such an unsuccessful attempt to estimate reserves, pointing out that one should not take such an estimate seriously, and the form contains an incorrect formula for calculating the value. In 2022, there have been heavy sanctions due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine that will likely result in steep recession. Since early 2022, many official economic statistics are not published. Sanctions also included asset freezes on the Russian central bank, which holds $630 billion in foreign exchange reserves, to prevent it from offsetting the impact of sanctions. According to most estimates, every day of the war in Ukraine costs Russia $500 million to $1 billion. In 2022, The Economist calculated that Russia did graduate into the category of high-income economies by 2022, if counted at purchasing power parity rather than the exchange rate, but could fall below the threshold because of invasion of Ukraine. In December 2022, in a study, an economist at the Bank of Russia's Research and Forecasting Department finds that the import dependence of the Russian economy is relatively low, does not exceed the median for other countries, and the share of imports in most industries is lower than in other countries. The key explanation for this could be the low involvement of the Russian economy in global value supply chains and its focus on production of raw materials. However, 60% of Russia's imports come from the countries that have announced sanctions against Russia. In August and September 2023, the Central Bank of Russia started raising the key lending rate, ending up at 13% in September, while USD to RUB exchange rate remained at 95 RUB. As of June 2023, share of Russia's exports to EU dropped to 1.7%, while Russia's imports from EU dropped to 1.5%. In October 2023, the psychological barrier of 100 RUB per $1 was crossed. The 2024 budget expects revenues of 35 trillion rubles, $349 billion, with expenditure of 36.6 trillion, based on a Urals oil forecast of $71.30 per barrel, a 90.1 rubles to $1 exchange rate, and inflation of 4.5%. Defense spending will double to 10.78 trillion, 29.4% of expenditure. Russia currently has a record low unemployment rate of just 3%. In Russia, areas where income is higher have increased air pollution. However, while income may have been higher in these regions, a greater disparity in income inequality was found. It was discovered that greater income inequality within a region is associated with more pollution, implying that it is not only the level of income that matters, but also its distribution. In Russia, areas lacking in hospital beds suffer from greater air pollution than areas with higher numbers of beds per capita, which implies that the poor or inadequate distribution of public services also may add to the environmental inequality of that region. Russia is a creditor nation and has a positive net international investment position. Russia has one of the lowest government debts, external and domestic, and lowest external debts among major economies. Russia's external debt was estimated at $381.8 billion as of January 1, 2023, down 20.8% from the previous year. Russia's external debt reached $357.9 billion in March 2023, compared with $380.5 billion in the previous quarter. On January 1, 2004, the government of Russia established the Stabilization Fund of the Russian Federation as part of the federal budget to balance it if price of oil falls. On February 1, 2008, the Stabilization Fund was divided into two parts. The first is a reserve fund equal to 10% of GDP and was to be invested in a similar way as the Stabilization Fund. The second is the National Welfare Fund of the Russian Federation, to be invested in more risky instruments, including some shares in domestic and foreign companies. The reserve fund, which started with $125 billion, was exhausted by 2017 and discontinued. The National Wealth Fund had started with $32 billion in 2008 and by August 2022, peaked at $201 billion. December 2023 saw it fall to $133 billion, with liquid assets also down at $56 billion. Russia was the lowest-rated European country in Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index for 2023, ranking 141 out of 180 countries. Corruption is perceived as a significant problem in Russia, impacting various aspects of life, including the economy, business, public administration, law enforcement, healthcare, and education. The phenomenon of corruption is strongly established in the historical model of public governance in Russia and attributed to general weakness of rule of law in Russia. As of 2020, the percentage of business owners who distrust law enforcement agencies rose to 70% from 45% in 2017. 75% don't believe in impartiality of courts, and 79% do not believe that legal institutions protect them from abuse of law, such as racketeering or arrest on dubious grounds. The mineral-packed Ural Mountains and the vast fossil fuel, oil, gas, coal, and timber reserves of Siberia and the Russian Far East make Russia rich in natural resources, which dominate Russian exports. Oil and gas exports, specifically, continue to be the main source of hard currency. Russia has been widely described as an energy superpower, as it has the world's largest natural gas reserves, the second largest coal reserves, the eighth largest oil reserves, and the largest oil shale reserves in Europe. It is the world's leading natural gas exporter, the second largest natural gas producer, the second largest oil exporter and producer, and the third largest coal exporter. Fossil fuels cause most of the greenhouse gas emissions by Russia. The country is the world's fourth largest electricity producer and the ninth largest renewable energy producer in 2019. Russia was also the world's first country to develop civilian nuclear power and built the world's first nuclear power plant. In 2019, it was the world's fourth largest nuclear energy producer. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian state nuclear conglomerate Rosatom became the dominant actor in international nuclear power markets, training experts, constructing nuclear power plants, supplying fuel, and taking care of spent fuel in around the world. Whereas oil and gas were subject to international sanctions after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2023, its nuclear industry was not targeted by sanctions. Russia is also a leading producer and exporter of minerals and gold. Russia is the largest diamond-producing nation in the world, estimated to produce over 33 million carats in 2013, or 25% of global output valued at over $3.4 billion, with state-owned Alrosa accounting for approximately 95% of all Russian production. In 2019, the country was the third world producer of gold, second worldwide producer of platinum, fourth worldwide producer of silver, ninth largest world producer of copper, third largest world producer of nickel, sixth largest world producer of lead, ninth largest world producer of bauxite, 10th largest world producer of zinc, second worldwide producer of vanadium, second largest world producer of cobalt, fifth largest world producer of iron ore, seventh largest world producer of boron, ninth largest world producer of molybdenum, 13th largest world producer of tin, third largest world producer of sulfur, fourth largest world producer of phosphate, eighth largest world producer of gypsum, in addition to being the world's 10th largest producer of salt. It was the world's sixth largest producer of uranium in 2018. Russia's agriculture sector contributes about 5% of the country's total GDP, although the sector employs about 1/8 of the total labor force. It has the world's third largest cultivated area, at 1,265,000 square kilometers. However, due to the harshness of its environment, about 13.1% of its land is agricultural, and only 7.4% of its land is arable. The main product of Russian farming has always been grain, which occupies considerably more than half of the cropland. Russia is the world's largest exporter of wheat, and is the largest producer of barley, buckwheat, oats, and rye, and the second largest producer of sunflower seed. Various analysts of climate change adaptation foresee large opportunities for Russian agriculture during the rest of the 21st century as arability increases in Siberia, which would lead to both internal and external migration to the region. More than 1/3 of the sown area is devoted to fodder crops, and the remaining farmland is devoted to industrial crops, vegetables, and fruits. Owing to its large coastline along 3 oceans, Russia maintains one of the world's largest fishing fleets, ranking 6th in the world in tonnage of fish caught, capturing over 4 million tons of fish in 2018. It is also home to the world's finest caviar, and produces about 1/3 of all canned fish, and some 1/4 of the world's total fresh and frozen fish. The defense industry of Russia is a strategically important sector and a large employer in the country. Russia has a large and sophisticated arms industry, capable of designing and manufacturing high-tech military equipment, including a 5th-generation fighter jet, nuclear-powered submarines, firearms, and short-range, long-range ballistic missiles. It is the world's second-largest exporter of arms, behind only the United States. Aircraft manufacturing is an important industry sector in Russia, employing around 355,300 people. The Russian aircraft industry offers a portfolio of internationally competitive military aircraft such as MiG-29 and Su-30, while new projects such as the Sukhoi Superjet 100 are hoped to revive the fortunes of the civilian aircraft segment. In 2009, companies belonging to the United Aircraft Corporation delivered 95 new fixed-wing aircraft to its customers, including 15 civilian models. In addition, the industry produced over 141 helicopters. It is one of the most science-intensive high-tech sectors and employs the largest number of skilled personnel. The production and value of the military aircraft branch far outstrips other defense industry sectors, and aircraft products make up more than half of the country's arms exports. The IT market is one of the most dynamic sectors of the Russian economy. Russian software exports have risen from just $120 million in 2000 to $3.3 billion in 2010. Since the year 2000, the IT market has started growth rates of 30 to 40% a year, growing by 54% in 2006 alone. The biggest sector in terms of revenue is system and network integration, which accounts for 28.3% of the total market revenues. Meanwhile, the fastest-growing segment of the IT market is offshore programming. Russia has more academic graduates than any other country in Europe and world leader in percentage of population with associate degree or higher, 54%, compared to 31% in UK. According to a UNWTO report, Russia is the 16th most visited country in the world and the 10th most visited country in Europe as of 2018, with 24.6 million visits. Russia is ranked 39th in the Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Report 2019. According to Federal Agency for Tourism, the number of inbound trips of foreign citizens to Russia amounted to 24.4 million in 2019. Russia's international tourism receipts in 2018 amounted to $11.6 billion. In 2020, tourism accounted for about 4% of country's GDP. Major tourist routes in Russia include a journey around the Golden Ring theme route of ancient cities, cruises on the big rivers like the Volga, and journeys on the famous Trans-Siberian Railway. Russia's most visited and popular landmarks include Red Square, the Peterhof Palace, the Kazan Kremlin, the Trinity Lavra of St. Sergius, and Lake Baikal. Russia top exports in 2021 were crude oil $110.9 billion, processed oil $69.9 billion, gold $17.3 billion, coal $15.4 billion, and natural gas $7.3 billion. Russia top imports in 2021 were transmission equipment $10.7 billion, medication $7.3 billion, tankers $3.7 billion, parts and accessories for data processing $3.7 billion, and storage units $3.3 billion.